Welcome back to Smart Life. As the economy ebbs and flows, charitable giving does the same thing. Charities have suffered in recent years, but donations are bouncing back. The Wall Street Journal asked, are Americans becoming less greedy? And the lady who actually used these words went to Vegas this weekend. It was very productive. That is my next guest. You know she's interesting, right? Have you ever heard those words? I think those are original words that should go down in history, April, because I don't think those words have ever been uttered. I went to Vegas this weekend. It was very productive. I'm glad to know. I went to LA last night.
And I don't work in any really interesting industry, so they do things in Vegas too that are also productive.
Well, I went to Vegas. I went to LA last night,
Yep.
and I can tell you, it probably productive is not exactly the word I would use, especially today.
Well, we were doing video and it was a coaching group and writing, and so for us it was very productive. We did play in the evening. I actually had a little wine and was in a hypnosis show, so we did have fun at the same time. You got to keep things in balance.
Yeah, I thought it was interesting. One thing you said, you and I love to talk about this kind of psychobabble stuff, but one of the things you said that my producer pointed out when he was seating you, he said, "Aren't you a hypnotherapist? Aren't you both licensed hypnotherapists?" And we are.
Right.
And yet we are some of the easiest people to take under. I didn't know that. I knew that I went under pretty easily, but I didn't know that that's because we are more suggestible simply
It's
because
we practice it all the time. It's
so
not
we
that we're more
trust the
suggestible.
art.
Exactly.
I
So
see.
we're comfortable with
that
it.
does make sense now.
Yep.
All right. Well, so there you go. Who knew? I'm more suggestible than I guess the
When
average
it's
person.
with someone you trust.
My husband loves when they hypnotize me in these hypnosis shows and make me into a child. He just thinks that's the cutest thing in the world because I always talk about my Barbie dream house and cereal I like and all those good things. How did we get on that? Wow, so too much Vegas
Fun
is the
segue,
answer.
yes, exactly.
Yeah. Interesting. this
Giving,
study.
giving, greed.
Giving, yeah. This it said not only that our giving is changing, but that there are certain segments of the population that are more charitable than others. Do tell.
Well, so the baby boomers, and on the last year of it, indeed are increased their giving, but it was at only something like 4%, whereas the Gen X and the millennials were giving around 10%. They're increasing their increased giving, but it's not just like, oh, this generation is greedy or keeping more of their own, keeping their own money. I was like, what's the problem there? It was because of what life phase they're in. The comment very much was that the boomers are moving into retirement and also suffered the most, were hit the hardest with the recession with their retirement savings.
I see.
So that sense of, maybe it's not the wisest thing for me to go give all this money away when my retirement funding that I need in the next couple of years just disappeared. Or is in half, whereas the other two generations are they're accumulating right now, so they don't have to worry about that in the same way of I need to use my retirement savings and start using the next year to 5 years.
Right.
So that was some of the reasons for why there are differences across the generations.
Well, there are also differences across states. Red states, more conservative states, tend to be more charitable, but religion is more a factor than wealth. Interesting.
Yes. It was interesting. They sort of commented on that, but they did say their study was entirely on people who are earning $50,000 or more a year, and certainly in some of the states that they were doing the studies in, that's not that's a fairly high income level. I would have been interested for them to have had the threshold maybe around 35,000 or so. The states where Mormonism and the Bible Belt were two of the areas where people are historically and culturally used to tithing. And
so tithing, I was just going to ask you,
Exactly.
does tithing count
Yes,
as
it did.
charitable donations?
It
so
did.
what you give to your church counts as a charitable donation?
It was religious organizations as well as nonprofits for other purposes were both being counted.
Okay, well, I think it's interesting, and that doesn't surprise me at all. People always love to say, oh, conservatives are all about greed, and I've always known that conservatives are very charitable.
It was absolutely, that was the whole thing, was also that those cultures are the areas where Republicans are the ones who believe that it's organizations and our church and our community who I'm looking to help me or where I help them, versus the government.
Rather than the government.
Exactly. The government's supposed to give me a helping hand.
Yeah, because I've heard Democrats say before, I don't mind paying more taxes, I want to help more people. No, that's not the purpose of government.
Right.
Government screws that all up. That's the
don't
reason
do it well.
conservatives don't like to pay taxes is because we know that it just promotes bloated bureaucracy and doesn't really get down to the people to help them.
I want to give it where I know the organization, where I know it's going to do well. They were mentioning there was a lady, I think it was in Cambodia, where there was a fabrication about her. She was a sex trafficking activist, and apparently her whole life story was faked. So that's the whole reason why Republicans like to know I'm the one who's deciding where my money is going versus who knows where the corruption if I give it.
I just think there's a big difference between, well, the Bible says it well, teaching a man to fish. I mean, you know, you hand somebody something, there's accountability, you have to look them in the eye. The government sends a check, that's just a completely different thing, and you're not really helping anybody,
not really.
In my opinion. All right, I love this. I saw this on one of the morning shows earlier in the week. Water makes us happier, healthier, and more successful. I knew it. And my husband said, you have always wanted to live on the water. You've always, and I thought, well, maybe there's something to the fact that I'm an Aquarius, which of course is ridiculous.
Who knows?
But I have always felt such a need to be on the water. Not just, it doesn't have to be the ocean, but I mean, literally, if I am in a bad moment in my life, I can stare into a puddle and feel slightly better. It doesn't have to be the ocean or a lake or a beautiful flowing stream. Those things are nice. Now, I live on the ocean. I live right on the ocean. I sleep to the tide rolling and hear the crash of the waves all night, every night. And I do think I am probably happier than I've ever been. You know, people say all the time, you know, I say I have this massive energy level. People said, well, maybe you're manic depressive. I'm like, manic without the depressive, maybe, because I really am a happy person.
Yeah.
How much does that have to do with water, and what does this study say?
I found it fascinating because I can't remember the exact percentage, but it's more than 50%. I want to say it's around 70% of our body is made up of water. It makes complete sense.
60% of our body. I think it's like 75% of our brain.
There we go.
It's
so I mean, like our whole body. So
yeah.
with the exact percentage, like around 70. So because of that, absolutely. Of course, we respond well to water. We are comprised of it. And it's also, the studies in terms of, you know, women and our biology in terms of our menstrual cycles change with the tide. So it completely makes sense to me. So he was doing a study, and he talks a lot about red brain, blue brain, where red brain is where we're such a stimulated, really hyper-stimulated lifestyle on the computer, using our smartphones, all these things, busy, busy, busy. Even to do something as simple as even looking at a puddle when you're in the bathtub and just focusing on the water, it's like the things of hypnosis or of prayer, meditation, any of those sort of brainwave states where we relax immediately calms us down. And they did a study. They actually have a project they're doing in Santa Cruz where vets who were so hyperstimulated and had so much trauma and were actually wanting to commit suicide went and did this. It helped them with that decompressing that they really needed and actually reconnected to a desire to live just by learning to surf.
50 times a day, I go look out my windows and stand out on my balcony and look at that and try to breathe once, you know, which I think really does help productivity and all those other things. My husband pointed out, he said, you know, you've never been as productive as you are now.
Yep.
You know, we
reconnect, relax, and you can get back to work. If
It's
you just go hyper stress mode 100%, we are less productive.
It's interesting because you think about a state like Missouri, where I'm originally from, landlocked. The environmentalists kept them from even putting a good lake around St. Louis. So there's literally just, you're landlocked in Missouri. You have to go elsewhere to get to water or clear to the Lake of the Ozarks, which is a pretty far drive. And I did notice a sort of a different attitude. I can't put my finger on it exactly. Less chill. I mean, on the coast,
more relaxed.
We're chill. We are. We're laid back. We're not in as much of a hurry. We're not as aggravated, not as easily taken to anger. I think that has to do with being around the water. I truly do.
I grew up in a town where a man-made canal was made into a lake. I went to a college where a river goes through the middle of it. I've lived in cities that were literally right next to the water. I'm the same way. I'm like, I love it.
Now looking at that, and there's also a new study, the 5 happiest cities in the U.S. are all in one state. What state is that?
Louisiana. And it's not just because, and it actually wasn't New Orleans. Those were not the happiest towns. Because of course when I read that, I was like, oh, they're all partying in New Orleans and having a great time. You know, that must be it, you know. You just read that and that's what they were, but that was not the case. And what was interesting when they commented both about sort of the happiness factor, but also about the cities like New York, which is, you know, I love New York and I love visiting and I've lived there. I would have thought New York would be like somewhere maybe in the middle or like, well, like not the unhappiest, but it was one of the highest ranking. I think it is like #1 for most unhappy. And they were citing things in terms of income as well as some of the political attitudes and for what's in the city. But it was a little unfortunate because I think some of like the wonderful richness and culture things that some of the areas that were unhappy offer that I would think that people would be happier about that. So I'd be interested to see what the study was more about. What did they ask? What were they doing to assess happiness? And they did mention things about being in Louisiana, about being in nature. And I always thought of like the redneck adventure sort of folks who love.
Don't start with the redneck thing. I love my Southerners.
My late husband's from who loved to go mudding, and that
right.
was it. That it was just like when you are out in nature and having fun, who is not happy doing that? So I think that was part of it.
Exactly. April Braswell, thank you so much for being with us, updating us on all the latest studies, helping to make us smarter all the time.
Happier.
And happier. And I can't wait to get home on my ocean.